All right. Let's talk cold sores.
Okay.
You know that feeling you get, like a little tingle, and then bam, the blister.
Yeah.
It's super common, right?
Right.
I mean, something like 2/3 of everyone in the world has that virus. HSV1,
HSV1.
herpes simplex virus 1.
Mm.
Most of the time, it's just like kind of annoying, goes away after a week or so. But
Yeah.
what if I told you that that really common virus could actually have like way bigger and longer lasting effects on our brains than we thought?
What's so interesting about this is that, like you were saying, so many people have HSV1,
Yeah.
but we think about it as like a skin thing,
Right.
like on the surface of the body. And this new research that we're going to talk about today,
Yeah.
the University of Illinois, Chicago, really is making us rethink that,
Yeah.
suggesting that there might be long-term neurological effects that we don't even realize.
That's exactly it. We're diving deep today into their findings, and they've found a possible link
Okay.
between HSV1 and like and some really worrisome long-term brain problems, stuff like anxiety
Wow.
and even issues with thinking straight.
Yeah.
It really makes you think twice about that next cold sore, doesn't it?
It really does. And the research that we're looking at today comes from a neuroscience news article
Okay.
that reports on a study that was published in the journal MBio
Right.
by a team at UIC, the University of Illinois, Chicago,
Yeah.
led by Deepak Shukla.
Okay.
And what they've done is they've focused on like a very specific
Right.
and potentially overlooked way that this infection happens.
So for you, our listener, what we really want to do today is
Yeah.
break down the biggest points of this research. And we're going to try to understand how HSV1, this virus,
Right.
might actually get into the brain through the nose.
Right.
We're going to look at the role of a specific enzyme that seems to be really important in this process, and then think about what this could all mean, because this virus is everywhere.
Right. It's so prevalent.
It is. It's so common.
Yeah.
So we're basically taking this common thing, HSV1,
Yep.
and seeing if it might have a really big impact on our brain health.
Yeah. I mean, we're really looking at it in a new way.
Exactly. And, you know, when we think about how we typically get HSV1,
Yeah.
we think about, like, you know, touching something, kissing someone, and then
Oh, yeah.
getting those blisters around the mouth.
Right. Yeah.
Some of us might even know that it can sometimes get into the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Or in, like, rare cases, it can go deeper into the nervous system and cause more serious problems.
Right.
But this new research
Yeah.
is looking at a totally different way it can get in, right?
It is. Yeah.
Like a new entry point.
Yeah. So the way we used to think about it was mostly about the virus getting in through like
Right.
the skin, you know, the mucosal surfaces like our lips.
Right.
And that's how we'd get the outbreaks, those sores.
Yeah.
But what this new study is doing is looking at what happens when the virus gets in through your nose.
Okay.
And the reason this is a big deal
Yep.
is because the nasal cavity gives the virus a much more direct route
Interesting.
to get to your nervous system.
Right.
So if you think about like a sore on your lip,
Yeah.
the virus has to travel a long way to get to the brain.
Right.
But from the nose, it's a much shorter trip.
So that direct access is really important then.
Yeah.
And Deepak Shukla, who led the research,
Okay.
he even said that if someone has the virus in their tears, it could actually go into the nasal cavity
Right.
and then from there pretty much go straight to the brain.
Right.
And he even thinks that the problems it causes in the brain from this nasal route are probably not being diagnosed enough
Okay.
and could be way more serious than what we see with a normal cold sore or even an eye infection.
Right.
So it's really making us think about HSV1 in a new way,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah.
Instead of just a skin problem, it might be a big problem for the brain.
It could be like a neurological agent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So to figure out exactly how this nasal route affects the brain,
Yeah.
they did some experiments on animals, right?
Yeah.
Like lab mice and stuff.
Right.
So what did they find?
So they used these animal models
Yeah.
to really look closely at the effects of HSV1 infection that starts in the nose.
Okay.
And what they found in just the first few days after infection was incredible.
Really?
They found a lot of inflammation in the brain.
Okay.
And they could even see that the neurons, the brain cells,
Yeah.
were being damaged.
Wow.
So it's clear that the nervous system reacts very quickly and strongly to the virus.
But it wasn't just the immediate reaction, right? They
Uh-huh.
also looked at the animals over a longer period of time.
They did, yeah.
And when we talk about long-term with animal studies,
Yeah.
it can tell us about what might happen to humans over many years.
Right, because their lifespans are so much shorter than ours.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So what happened?
So they followed these animals for a few months.
Okay.
And what they saw were some pretty concerning changes in how the animals behaved.
Okay.
The infected animals did worse on tests
Right.
that were designed to see how well they could move and coordinate their bodies.
So like their balance and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they also did worse on memory tests.
Oh, wow. So it was affecting how they were
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah. And compared to the animals in the control group, the ones who weren't infected,
Yeah.
they also showed more behaviors that looked like anxiety.
So we're seeing actual differences in their physical abilities,
Yeah.
their brain function, and even their emotions.
It's really incredible, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Even months after they were first infected.
Yeah.
This really shows what Shukla was talking about, right?
Right.
Like the damage to nerves that
Yeah.
can happen when the virus comes in through the nose.
It's not just the initial infection.
Right.
It seems like there's this lasting impact
Yeah.
on how the brain actually works.
Yep.
And this is where we need to talk about a specific enzyme called heparanase.
Okay, heparanase, this is kind of a complicated word.
It is, yeah. It's a bit of a mouthful.
So what is it exactly?
So heparanase is an enzyme that's
Boy.
found inside our cells.
Okay.
And you can think of it like a tiny little tool.
Okay.
And actually, Shukla's lab had already been looking at this enzyme in other studies on HSV-1 reinfection
Right.
and how that can sometimes lead to long-term problems.
Right.
So heparanase basically breaks down this molecule called heparan sulfate,
Okay.
which is found on the surface of our cells and in the spaces between them.
Right.
And what they found in this new study is that heparanase seems to be really, really important in allowing HSV-1
Okay.
to cause damage in the brain.
So it's not just the virus itself.
Right.
It's our own bodies
Exactly.
reacting to it in a certain way.
Yeah. And in particular, the activity of this heparanase enzyme.
Okay, so how did they figure that out?
So they looked at some animals where they basically turned off the gene
Interesting.
that makes heparanase.
Okay.
So these animals couldn't produce heparanase.
Right.
And what they found was that these animals didn't have the same neurobehavioral problems
Okay.
after they were infected with HSV-1 through the nose
Interesting.
compared to the animals that had normal levels of heparanase.
Right.
So this strongly suggests that heparanase is part of the process
Yeah.
that leads to the brain damage
Okay.
and those long-term effects we talked about.
So if you can stop this enzyme
Yeah.
from doing its thing,
Right.
it seems like you could stop those problems.
That's exactly what's so exciting about this, right?
Yeah.
Because if we can stop heparanase,
Yeah.
we might be able to stop all those bad things from happening.
Yeah. So this could lead to some new treatments.
Right.
For people with HSV-1.
And actually, Hemant Barais,
Yeah.
who was the lead author of the study,
Okay.
he said that these findings could lead to new therapies that target heparanase in order to reduce brain inflammation
Right.
and prevent long-term brain damage.
From viral infections like HSV-1.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's important to remember how common HSV-1 is, right?
It is. It's so common.
Like 2 out of every 3 people in the world have this virus.
That's amazing.
It's really a huge number.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization says so.
Yeah, and another researcher who worked on the study,
Right.
Chandrasekhar Patil, he pointed out that this is a lifelong infection.
Right.
It's not something that just goes away.
Yeah.
The virus can stay dormant in your body
Yeah.
and then reactivate at different times throughout your life.
So understanding these long-term neurological consequences,
Yeah.
especially with this nasal route of infection,
Yeah.
is super important, right?
It is.
Both for raising awareness
Yeah.
and figuring out where we need to go next with research.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Tabor Valianagi also worked on this study,
Yes, he was a co-author.
showing that this was a real team effort
Yep.
to try to understand how this virus affects our nervous system.
Absolutely.
So that Neuroscience News article gives us a great overview,
Yeah.
but the actual study in MBio, their
Right.
abstract, gets into a bit more detail about how this all works.
It does.
So what were some of the key things you saw in the abstract?
So the abstract talks about how heparanase is actually causing these damaging effects.
Okay.
And they say that heparanase, or HPSE,
Right.
acts as a key mediator of neuroinflammation.
Okay.
So basically, it's a major player in causing inflammation in the brain.
And the animals that got HSV-1 through their noses?
Exactly.
Okay.
And they found that when heparanase is active during the infection,
Okay.
it actually makes the body produce more of these things called pro-inflammatory cytokines.
Okay, pro-inflammatory cytokines, what are those?
So these are signaling molecules
Okay.
that basically tell the immune system
Yeah.
to ramp up its response.
So it's like heparanase is making the inflammation worse.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And the abstract also talks about microglia.
Oh, yeah.
So these are immune cells that live in the brain.
Okay, like the brain's own immune system.
Yeah, you can think of them like the brain's security guards.
Okay.
They're there to protect the brain,
Right.
but when they become too active,
Yeah.
they can actually damage the neurons.
Okay, so the inflammation is making the microglia go crazy.
Yeah, that's the idea. And the abstract links all of this
Right.
to those problems we talked about, the cognitive impairment, the anxiety, and the problems with movement
Right.
that they saw in the animals.
And the mice that didn't have heparanase,
Yeah,
they didn't have these problems as badly.
right. They didn't. Yeah.
Right. So that's more evidence that
So-
heparanase is the problem.
Yeah, it really points to heparanase being a central part of this whole damaging process.
Okay.
The abstract also mentions these things called toll-like receptors.
Right. And in the inflammasome pathway.
Yeah, it's getting a bit technical, but basically the researchers found that these toll-like receptors,
Right.
which are like sensors on immune cells
Okay.
that detect invaders like viruses,
Yeah.
might be involved in activating this thing called the inflammasome pathway.
Okay.
And this is like a more intense alarm system
Yeah.
within the immune cells.
Okay.
And when the inflammasome is activated,
Yeah.
it can trigger the activation of these enzymes called caspases,
Okay.
specifically caspase 1 and caspase 3,
Right.
which can basically tell a cell to self-destruct if
Okay.
it's damaged or infected.
So this could be another way
Yeah.
that the virus is causing nerve damage.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
HSV1 gets into the nose.
Right.
Heparanase gets activated. There's
Yeah.
more inflammation.
Uh,
The immune system goes into overdrive.
right. Right.
And this can lead to nerve damage
Yeah.
and those long-term behavioral issues we talked about.
But if heparanase isn't there,
Right.
that whole chain reaction
Yeah.
gets disrupted.
It does, yeah.
And the abstract ends by saying that heparanase could be a good target for future therapies.
Yeah, because if we can target heparanase,
Yeah.
we might be able to stop that whole chain reaction from happening
Right.
and prevent the brain damage and the behavioral problems.
So for you, our listener, the big things to take away from all of this are that this virus, HSV1,
Which is so common.
it is,
Yeah.
might be able to get into our brains through our noses
Right.
more easily than we thought.
Yeah.
And this could lead to some long-term problems
Right?
with our thinking and even our emotions.
Yeah, like anxiety and cognitive impairment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this enzyme, heparanase, seems to be a big part of the problem, which
Yeah.
means it could also be a way to find new treatments.
It's really exciting to think about,
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And considering how many people have HSV1,
right? It's a huge portion of the population.
it is.
Yeah.
These findings are really important for global health.
It really highlights how complex these viruses are.
Yeah.
Even viruses that we think we understand well,
Right?
like
right.
HSV1.
Yeah.
And it shows how important research is
Right.
for uncovering these less obvious but potentially really significant impacts on our health.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to
Okay.
think about.
Yeah.
We know HSV1 is a lifelong infection.
Right.
It comes back again and again.
It does, yeah.
And now we know about this potential link
Yeah.
to long-term brain problems through the nose.
Yeah.
What kind of research do you think we need to do to fully understand this and maybe even find ways to prevent it?
It's a really important question to consider.
It is.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about more than just those annoying cold sores, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It does.